Sergeant Thomas Garrett had been avoiding the central market on auction days for 3 solid months, but today he had no choice. His merchant contact, a dwarf trader named Boren who served as informal liaison between Earth's expeditionary forces and the local business community, only conducted meetings at the market, and only on auction days when the crowds provided cover for discussions that both parties preferred to keep unofficial. So here Thomas was, standing at the edge of Crosspoint's sprawling market square, trying to ignore the slave auction happening 50 meters away on the central platform. Crosspoint was a border city, a trading hub where 5 different territories met: human lands, elven kingdoms, dwarven holds, orcish clans, and the independent city-states. Earth's expeditionary forces had established a small base here 3 months ago, as part of the diplomatic mission, trying to build alliances in this world, where humans were newcomers and outsiders. The city operated under what the local coalition government called traditional commerce practices, which Thomas had quickly learned was diplomatic code for "we have slavery, and we're not changing that no matter what the humans think about it." Earth's official position was clear: opposition to slavery in all forms, advocacy for universal rights, push for gradual reform through diplomatic channels. But also, don't create incidents, don't interfere with local practices. Don't jeopardize the fragile political relationships that humanity was trying to establish. Document everything. Report to command. Let the diplomats handle it through proper channels. Thomas understood the logic. Earth's presence here was tenuous. A few hundred personnel, one small base, minimal defensive capability. If the coalition decided humans were more trouble than they were worth, they couldn't afford to antagonize their hosts over cultural differences, no matter how morally wrong those differences were. But understanding the logic didn't make it easier to watch people being sold as property while he stood by doing nothing. The market was packed today. Hundreds of people buying, selling, trading everything from exotic spices to enchanted weapons to livestock. The noise was overwhelming. Merchants calling out prices, customers haggling, animals making various sounds, the general chaos of commerce at full volume. And cutting through all of it, the auctioneer's magically amplified voice announcing the next lot in the slave auction. Thomas found Boren at his usual stall near the textile merchants, far enough from the auction platform to allow conversation without shouting, but close enough that Thomas could still hear every word of the bidding. "Sergeant Garrett." Boren greeted him with the kind of enthusiastic handshake that dwarves seem to think humans appreciated. "Good to see you. I've got information about those trade routes you asked about. The northern passes are opening up earlier than usual this year. Avalanche cleared some key choke points, so your supply convoys should have better access starting next month." Thomas tried to focus on the briefing, tried to pay attention to logistics and routes and tariff structures, tried to ignore the auction. "Next lot." The auctioneer's voice boomed across the market. Orcish female, approximately 25 years by human reckoning. Fully trained in household service and manual labor. Excellent physical condition. No defects or behavioral issues reported. Opening bid is 500 gold sovereigns. Thomas's eyes were drawn to the platform despite his best efforts not to look. The woman being displayed was orcish, tall and powerfully built with the greenish skin and prominent tusks characteristic of her species. She was wearing minimal clothing clearly chosen to display her physique to potential buyers. She was chained, wrists bound in front of her, connected to a collar at her throat, ankles shackled with just enough slack to walk but not run. Her expression was carefully blank, but Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched into fists despite the restraints, the absolute stillness of someone using every ounce of control to maintain composure. The bidding started immediately. 500, 550, 600 gold sovereigns. Merchants and nobles raising hands, calling out bids, treating a living person like livestock. "The orcish slaves usually make good workers," Boren commented, noticing Thomas's attention had drifted. Strong, resilient, don't need much maintenance once they're properly trained. Although personally I prefer elven slaves for household service, more refined aesthetically, you understand. But for manual labor or guard work, orcs are hard to beat. Thomas made a noncommittal sound, trying to keep his expression neutral while his stomach churned. 700. 750. 800 gold sovereigns. The bids kept climbing. This particular woman was apparently valuable property. Thomas forced himself to look away, to focus on Boren's explanation of shipping schedules and warehouse availability. Forced himself to maintain the professional detachment that 3 months in Crosspoint had taught him was necessary for surviving this posting. But he could still hear the auction, still hear a person's life being bought and sold, while hundreds of people watched like it was normal and acceptable and just another day at the market. 850. 900 gold sovereigns. The voice that called out the 900 bid was cultured, aristocratic, probably an elven noble based on the accent, someone who could afford to pay premium price for premium property. 900 gold sovereigns. The auctioneer called triumphantly. Excellent bid, do I hear 950? This is an exceptional specimen, fully trained, no defects. 950, anyone. Thomas looked back at the platform again, couldn't help himself. The orc woman was still standing in that carefully controlled stillness, but her breathing had changed. Faster, shallower. She knew she was about to be sold, knew that in moments someone would own her, would have legal right to control every aspect of her life, would be able to do whatever they wanted with her as long as they didn't damage the property. 900 gold going once. Thomas felt something snap inside him, not dramatically, not like a violent break, more like a quiet certainty settling into place. He couldn't do this. Couldn't stand here conducting business as usual while a person was sold 50 meters away. Couldn't maintain professional detachment while someone's freedom was being auctioned to the highest bidder. I need to go, he said to Boren, interrupting the dwarf mid-sentence about tariff exemptions. What? But we haven't finished discussing the... I need to go, Thomas repeated, already moving. He walked toward the auction platform with purpose, cutting through the crowd. People noticed, hard not to notice a human in Earth military uniform suddenly moving with clear intent through the packed market. 900 gold going twice. Thomas reached the platform and climbed the steps. The auctioneer noticed him immediately. A human in uniform appearing on the auction block was definitely not standard procedure. Sir, this is a closed auction. If you wish to bid, you must register with. I'm not here to bid, Thomas said clearly. The magical amplification caught his voice and projected it across the suddenly quieting market square. People were noticing now, turning to look, wondering what the human was doing. Thomas walked directly to the orc woman. She was staring at him with an expression that had shifted from blank control to confusion mixed with something that looked like desperate hope. He pulled out his multitool, standard military issue with various functions including a lockpick set. He examined the shackles on her wrists, decent quality locks but nothing sophisticated. Designed to restrain, not to resist someone who knew what they were doing. What are you doing? The auctioneer demanded. This is highly irregular, you can't just... Thomas ignored him and went to work on the right wrist shackle. The lock was a simple pin-tumbler mechanism. His lockpick set included tools specifically designed for this type. He'd been trained in lock bypassing as part of his combat engineering certification. You never knew when you'd need to access a locked facility in hostile territory. Click, the right wrist shackle opened and fell away. The orc woman gasped, a small sound quickly suppressed but audible in the space between them. Thomas moved to the left wrist. Click. Both wrist shackles were now free. She instinctively brought her hands up to rub where the metal had been restraining her, her eyes wide and locked on Thomas like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Guards! The auctioneer was shouting now, his voice cracking slightly. This person is interfering with legal commerce. Remove him immediately. The market square was going quiet now, hundreds of conversations dying, as people turned to watch the unprecedented scene of a human soldier, systematically unlocking a slave's restraints in the middle of an active auction. Thomas knelt and examined the ankle shackles. These locks were slightly more complex, designed to prevent the slave from removing them themselves, positioned so they couldn't easily reach or manipulate the mechanism. But Thomas wasn't the slave. He had full access and proper tools. Click, click. The ankle shackles fell away. Now only the collar remained, the visible symbol of enslaved status, the marker that this person was property. Thomas stood and moved behind her to access the collar's lock, positioned at the back of her neck where she couldn't reach it herself. Stop this immediately. The auctioneer had recovered enough from shock to assert authority. You have no right to damage auction property. The current bid stands at 900 gold sovereigns. This slave belongs to. She doesn't belong to anyone, Thomas interrupted, still working on the collar lock. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, carried across the market by the amplification magic. Not anymore. Click, the collar fell away. The orc woman caught it reflexively before it hit the ground, then stared at it in her hands like she couldn't quite process that it was no longer around her neck. Thomas stepped back, giving her space. You're free, no one owns you, you can go wherever you want. She looked at the collar in her hands, then at her bare wrists where shackles had been moments ago. Then at Thomas with an expression of complete bewilderment, mixed with dawning comprehension that something impossible had just occurred. The market square had gone absolutely silent. Hundreds of people who moments ago were conducting business as usual were now staring at the platform, where a human had just freed a slave in the middle of an auction without bidding, without paying, without claiming ownership, just unlocking chains and declaring her free. This is outrageous. The auctioneer was nearly incoherent with rage and confusion. Guards, arrest this human. He's destroyed valuable property. He's violated commercial law. I haven't destroyed anything, Thomas said, his amplified voice carrying across the silent market. I've removed some metal restraints from a person who didn't consent to wearing them. The chains are right here. He gestured to the pile of shackles on the platform, completely undamaged. You can put them on someone else if you really want to, just not her. The guards were moving toward the platform now, several of them. City watch with authority to enforce commercial law. But they were moving slowly, uncertainly, because what Thomas had done didn't fit any script they had for handling disruptions. He hadn't stolen property. He hadn't claimed ownership or tried to take her away. He hadn't made a bid. He hadn't offered payment or entered the commercial transaction. He hadn't even really protested. He hadn't made speeches or demands or tried to stop the entire auction. He just freed one person, removed restraints, acted like he had the absolute right to do so without asking permission or negotiating price. An elven guard with officer's insignia reached the platform first. His expression suggested he was trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. Sergeant Garrett, he said formally, apparently recognizing Thomas from previous official interactions. You are interfering with legal commerce protected under Crosspoint municipal law and coalition treaty. I must ask you to step aside and allow the auction to proceed. No, Thomas said simply. You're refusing a lawful order. I'm refusing to let you put chains back on someone I just freed. Yes. The orc woman was backing away from the center of the platform now, moving toward the edge while clutching the collar she'd caught when it fell. She was looking around wildly, at the guards, at Thomas, at the crowd, at the exit, like she was trying to calculate whether she could actually escape or whether this was some elaborate cruelty. The guard captain, the elven officer who'd addressed Thomas, looked genuinely conflicted. Sergeant, you understand this will create significant diplomatic incident. Earth's forces are here under treaty that requires respect for local law and custom. I understand that I saw a person being sold as property, and I couldn't make myself walk away from that," Thomas replied. "If that creates a diplomatic incident, that's a problem for people above my pay grade." He looked out at the crowd, hundreds of people who'd been perfectly comfortable watching a slave auction until someone actually disrupted it. "I know Earth's official position is non-interference with local practices. I know my orders are to observe and document without causing incidents, but I also know that some things are wrong regardless of whether they're legal. Selling people is one of those things. It was wrong when humans did it on Earth. It's wrong here, and I can't just stand by and watch it happen." The crowd was murmuring now, not unified response, but multiple reactions. Outrage from some merchants whose commercial interests were being threatened. What sounded like approval from others, probably people who opposed slavery but hadn't dared to act against it publicly. Confusion from many who weren't sure how to process what they were seeing. "I sympathize with your moral position," the guard captain said quietly. "But I have duties under law. I must place you under arrest for destruction of property and interference with legal commerce." "The property isn't destroyed," Thomas pointed out again. "It's right there, and I accept that you have to arrest me. I knew that was probable when I started, but before you do." He turned to the orc woman, who was still standing at the platform's edge, looking like a wild animal ready to bolt. "You're free, actually free. I can't stop them from trying to reclaim you, but you have every right to leave this place and go wherever you want. Don't let anyone convince you that you're still property. You're a person. You always were. The chains were just metal. They didn't define you." She stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes were amber, unusual for orcs but striking, and they were locked on his face like she was trying to determine if he was real or some kind of hallucination brought on by stress. Then she dropped the collar, just let it fall to the platform with a clatter that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet market, and she ran, not toward any particular exit, just away. Away from the platform, from the chains, from the place where she'd been about to be sold. She jumped from the platform edge, didn't bother with the steps, and hit the ground running with the desperate speed of someone who'd been given an impossible gift and was terrified it would be snatched away. The crowd parted in front of her. People jumped aside as she barreled through with the single-minded focus of someone fleeing for their life. Some of the guards moved to pursue her, but Thomas stepped into their path. "I said she's free. Anyone who tries to re-enslave her goes through me." The guards hesitated, because Thomas was a soldier from Earth's military, and while the expeditionary force was small, it was also heavily armed and had technology that made direct confrontation dangerous. Because arresting him was one thing, but assaulting him might trigger a military response. Because the political situation was delicate, and no one wanted to be responsible for starting an incident that could escalate. "Let her go," someone shouted from the crowd, a dwarf from the sound of it. "The human's right selling people is wrong. We've known it's wrong. We just haven't had the spine to say it out loud." Other voices joined in, not a majority, but enough to create confusion and debate. "This is chaos," the auctioneer protested. "We can't just let valuable property escape because one human has moral objections." "She's not property," another voice from the crowd, orcish this time. "She's one of my people being sold like livestock. The human did what we should have done years ago." The market was fragmenting now, some defending the auction and commercial law, others supporting Thomas's action, many simply confused about what was supposed to happen next when the normal script had been so thoroughly disrupted. The guard captain made a command decision. "Sergeant Garrett, you are under formal arrest for interference with legal commerce. You will be taken into custody pending investigation and potential charges." He turned to his subordinates. "The orc female, that's a separate matter for city authorities to pursue. Our immediate duty is to secure the individual who disrupted the auction." It was a politically calculated choice. Arrest the obvious troublemaker. Let the escaped slave become someone else's problem. Avoid making the situation worse by trying to chase down someone who was already gone. Thomas didn't resist as they bound his hands, not the slave chains but proper prisoner restraints. "I understand. I'm not going to fight you." As the guards escorted him from the platform, Thomas could see the market erupting into arguments and debates. The auction had completely collapsed. No one was bidding anymore. Everyone was too busy discussing what had just happened. Merchants were angry about the disruption to commerce. Some citizens were defending Thomas's action. Others were arguing about whether slavery should be legal at all. The careful social consensus that allowed the practice to continue undiscussed was fracturing in real time. Thomas caught glimpses of people in the crowd as the guards led him away. Some were glaring at him with obvious hostility. Others were nodding in what looked like approval or respect. Many just looked confused, like they weren't sure what to think about what they'd witnessed. He didn't know what would happen to the orc woman. Didn't know if she'd actually manage to escape or if she'd be recaptured and returned to auction. Didn't know if his action had actually accomplished anything beyond creating a diplomatic crisis. But he knew he couldn't have done anything else. Because when you see something fundamentally wrong, sometimes documentation and proper channels aren't enough. Sometimes you have to be the person who stops the auction, unlocks the chains, and forces everyone watching to confront what they've been accepting. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and severe. Thomas was held in city custody while Earth's command scrambled to figure out how to handle the incident. The coalition government demanded punishment for violation of local law. Thomas's commanding officer was furious about the unauthorized action that jeopardized the entire diplomatic mission. But the political situation was more complex than simple law enforcement. Because the market incident had been witnessed by hundreds of people, and word spread fast. Within hours, everyone in Crosspoint knew that a human soldier had freed a slave in the middle of an auction. The story grew in the telling. Some versions made Thomas out to be a hero. Others painted him as a dangerous radical who didn't respect local sovereignty. But everyone was talking about it. And in talking about it, they were talking about slavery itself, a topic that had existed in careful social silence, practiced but not discussed, accepted but not examined. 3 days into Thomas's detention, something unexpected happened. The orc woman returned. She walked into the city guard headquarters, no longer chained, wearing simple but clean clothing that someone had apparently given her, and demanded to testify on Thomas's behalf. "I am Kethara," she told the officials in formal Orcish that the translators rendered into common tongue. "I was the property being auctioned when Sergeant Garrett freed me. I am here to provide testimony about that event." The officials tried to dismiss her. She was escaped property without legal standing to testify. But she was insistent, and the growing crowd of supporters outside the building made it politically difficult to simply drag her away. "He freed me without claiming ownership," Kethara stated. "He unlocked my chains and told me I was free. He didn't try to buy me. He didn't try to take me with him. He just removed restraints I hadn't consented to wearing and told me I could go wherever I wanted." Her amber eyes were fierce. "In my clan, before we were defeated and I was taken as war prize, we valued courage and direct action. What Sergeant Garrett did, that was courage. Standing in front of everyone and saying, 'This is wrong,' not with words but with actions. Freeing someone because it was right, not because it was legal or profitable or politically smart." The testimony didn't change the legal situation. Thomas had still violated commercial law. But it changed the political calculation. Because now it wasn't just an abstract question of respecting local sovereignty versus human moral objections. It was a specific story about a specific person who'd been freed, who was standing there describing the experience, who was putting a face to the practice that most people preferred to ignore. Public opinion in Crosspoint began to shift. Not uniformly. There was still significant opposition, but enough to make the coalition government hesitate before making Thomas an example. Earth's diplomatic corps negotiated a compromise. Thomas would be officially reprimanded and reassigned, but not prosecuted under local law. In exchange, Earth would formally commit to not interfering with Crosspoint's internal practices again. But the damage, or progress depending on perspective, was done. The incident had started conversations that were hard to stop, about whether slavery should be legal, about what rights enslaved people should have, about whether traditional practices deserved protection when they involved treating people as property. Reform movements that had existed in small, quiet circles suddenly had public attention and momentum. The incident became a reference point. Remember when the human freed that orc woman at the market? That made it harder to maintain the comfortable silence that had allowed the practice to continue unchallenged. Before Thomas left Crosspoint, reassigned to a different posting where his tendency toward moral action over diplomatic calculation would be less problematic, Cathara came to see him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing person instead of property, for acting when others just watched, for giving me back the freedom that should never have been taken." "What will you do now?" Thomas asked. "Are you safe?" "I've joined the reform movement," Cathara replied, "using my experience to advocate for ending slavery. It's dangerous. There are people who want me silenced or recaptured. But you showed me that sometimes the right action is worth the danger." She studied him seriously. "You knew freeing me would create problems for you. You did it anyway. Why?" "Because I couldn't walk away," Thomas said honestly. "Because watching you being sold and doing nothing, that would have cost me something I wasn't willing to lose. Whatever consequences I face for freeing you, they're better than what I'd have faced living with myself if I just stood by." "That's what courage is," Cathara observed. "Not the absence of fear or the calculation that you'll be rewarded, but the inability to do anything else when confronted with what's wrong." She held out her wrist, showing where the shackle had been, now just a faint mark on her skin. These chains were metal. They could be unlocked with proper tools and knowledge, but there are chains built from law and custom and social acceptance. Those are harder to break. "You helped break them," Thomas replied. "By coming back, by testifying, by refusing to disappear quietly like you were supposed to, you made it impossible for people to ignore what slavery actually means." "We broke them together," Cathara corrected. "You with your lockpicks and your inability to walk away. Me with my testimony and my refusal to stay silent. That's how change happens. Not from one dramatic gesture, but from people choosing to act and speak when silence would be easier." Years later, historians studying the reform movements that eventually led to Crosspoint abolishing slavery would point to the market incident as a catalyst. Not the only cause. Reform had been building for years through the work of many people. But the moment when what had been ignorable became visible. When a human stopped an auction. When chains were unlocked without payment or ownership. When someone was freed not through legal process but through moral conviction. When a crowd fell silent and had to confront what they'd been accepting. The story would be told and retold. The human who couldn't walk away. The orc woman who refused to disappear. The moment when normalcy shattered because one person decided that some things were worth the consequences. Thomas's military career never recovered. His record showed tendency toward unauthorized moral action that made him